Christianity. We've discussed Bible. We've discussed interpretation of the Bible. Now this week I was going to talk about a little historical stuff this week, right? Judaism and Christianity, a little historical narrative, parting of the ways, to use a classic phrase to describe the separation of Judaism from Christianity and Christianity from Judaism, and introducing some of the main characters whom we will be meeting during our course. That's the plan for this week. I forgot to note on the syllabus that I need to back up one step further, which is to sort of give a kind of general overview of ancient Judaism or ancient Jewish history, the context out of which or in which all these events will transpire and these books will be written. So I posted up on the course page under lecture notes a nice timeline, names and dates and so on. We usually don't do that in this course, but we're going to do that today. Hopefully I'll get that done in less than half whole session, and we can get to Mr. Ensslin, who's waiting patiently for us, to talk about earliest Christianity. But even if I don't get to Mr. Ensslin today, not to worry, it'll fit in perfectly well with Thursday. I will very deftly sew everything together on Thursday. But first I need to do some names, dates, facts, figures, and so on. Okay? The timeline I gave you is full of names and dates. I'm not going to go through all of them, nor do I expect you to know all of them. I'm simply hoping you can look at them and some things will sound familiar to you and jog your memory, and you'll have a sense of how things fit together. For our purposes, I'm going to just jump down on your timeline. So the first dates to notice would be the end of the 8th century BCE. I have it up there, don't I, with prophets. Right. We'll be looking, some of the biblical prophets will come across our pages of this course. Notably Isaiah, whom I've mentioned a number of times, right, who is a prophet in the end of the 8th century BCE. 700s BCE. That's Isaiah of Jerusalem. The real Isaiah of Jerusalem we're not interested in, because we're not doing a course in Hebrew Bible, right? We're looking at how prophecies of Isaiah are read by Jews and Christians centuries later. But at least we should have some vague idea that Isaiah of Jerusalem, the putative author of the book of Isaiah, is in the period of the golden age of Israelite prophecy, the time of the 8th century BCE. We'll meet other prophets from that time. Also, Micah will come across our pages, Amos, who also are figures from the 8th century BCE. The other main period of prophecy is associated with the destruction of the temple, 587, 586. That's a date worth knowing. Hint, hint, hint. All right, 587, 586 BCE. I put a slash there because when I went to school it was 586 BCE, and then a few years ago all of a sudden became 587 BCE. So I didn't investigate this chronological uncertainty, but it doesn't really affect us terribly much, right? What happened in 587, or maybe it was 586 BCE in the summertime? The temple of Jerusalem was destroyed. The Judeans are exiled from Jerusalem to Babylon. Not all of them, but a good chunk of them. Okay, where is Babylon today?
One of the 10 easiest courses.
One of the 10 easiest courses at Harvard College. Yes, I know. That's where Babylon is today. Right. Right. Where is Babylon today? Iraq. Right. Iraq. Right. Right. So modern day Baghdad is right in the middle of what I used to call downtown Babylonia. Right. The heart of historic Babylonia. Or the other word would be Mesopotamia, between the Tigris and the Euphrates. So the Judeans are exiled from Judea. They're exiled hundreds of miles right to the east to Babylon. Right? The Babylonian Empire destroyed the temple. During this time, the destruction of the temple, which will be mentioned from time to time in your reading, right? There's the second golden age of prophecy associated with these events of the events around the end of the 7th century, early 6th century BCE. Here we have the other two big prophets, Jeremiah and Ezekiel, right? Whose names will also come up from time to time. These are prophets. Again, what are prophets? Messengers from God bringing a message to the people about contemporary events and related matters. Okay, that's 587, 586 BC. That's the destruction of the first temple, the exile, and those of you who know the history of the medieval papacy, this is where the phrase the Babylonian exile comes from. You know what I'm talking about? No, maybe. Okay. Can't do everything in this course. Okay. So the exile is when the Pope goes to Avignon, right? The Pope leaves Rome to go to Avignon. It's called the Babylonian exile. Okay, so the Judeans returned to Judea from Babylon and rebuild their temple and re-establish something like an autonomous existence in their own community, in their own homeland, right? What date do we give for that? Well, it's a complicated, very messy problem. We'll just pick the date that Jeremiah gives us. Jeremiah says the exile will last 70 years. 70 years. So go down to 516 BCE. That's up there on your chart. 516 BCE, 70 years after 587, 586. Right? The Judeans have returned from Babylon and have rebuilt their temple. So now this is called, we now often call this the Second Temple. You figured it out, right? Because there was a First Temple. Right. Okay, quick review. The First Temple was destroyed when? 587, 586. Excellent. Okay, Second Temple gets rebuilt in 516 BC. Now just to run ahead for a second, I'll run right back, don't worry. The Second Temple in turn is destroyed in 70 CE. Right, that's the date coming up on right there. Jerusalem Temple destroyed by the Romans. Right? So don't confuse the destruction of the First Temple, 587. The destruction of the Second Temple, 70 CE. Don't confuse the Babylonians with the Romans. I know, from one perspective, it all happened a long time ago and it's all the same. Yeah, I understand that perspective. The temptation is overwhelming. I mean, what difference does it make? Right, but it makes a difference, right? You got to get these things straight. Okay? So the destruction of the Second Temple is 70 CE by the Romans. Good. Okay, let's go back to where we are. So the Second Temple is rebuilt in 516 BCE. Right? We're now in the period of the Judeans living under the reign of empires, large empires. Babylonian Empire, which destroyed the First Temple. It came and went. Now the new empire, the new big bully on the block, the new imperialist, colonialist power is now Persia Empire. Where is Persia? Iran. Right. So ancient Babylon is Iraq. Now we've shifted from an Iraq-based empire, Mesopotamia, to Iran. Right, to the Persian Empire. Judeans are living under the Persian Empire. Persian Empire comes and goes, and of course, following the Persians come the Greeks. Right, the Hellenistic Empire. You have there Alexander the Great. Right, Alexander the Great in 333. You can pick a lot of different dates for Alexander the Great. 333. Good way to remember it. Easy number to remember. One of the great victories of Alexander the Great over the Persians is in 333. BCE. He probably conquers Judea in 332 BCE, but that doesn't really matter. Or 334, whatever. Doesn't matter. 333 BCE, right? Alexander the Great. So now the Persians are out of the picture. The Persians are kaput, right? Now we have the Greeks, or the also called Hellenistic empires. Okay, it's not our concern because this will not play into our course very much because ancient Jews and Christians knew very little about the Hellenistic period and cared less. Right? The only events that you need to know about are in the middle of the 2nd century BCE, right, where it says 167 to 164 BCE. Right, that's up there, isn't it, somewhere? Mm-hmm. Yes, good. I have a slightly different version here on my iPad. That's why I'm a little worried to make sure that they line up. Okay, 167, 164 BC. These are very dramatic events. They are important historically in the development of Judaism. These are the dramatic events where the Greek kings of Syria, known as the Seleucids, too much information. TMI, it's okay. The Greek kings of Syria profaned the temple in Jerusalem for reasons not clear. The Judeans take umbrage at this fact, and some of them at least rebel against the Greek kings of Syria, the Seleucid king, and they rebel and retake the temple, re-purify it. Right? And the little holiday that emerges as a result is the holiday of Hanukkah. I forgot to put that down. Festival of Hanukkah, right? And that's why Jewish boys and girls get presents, right? Because the Maccabees, the Hasmoneans, were successful in beating back the Seleucids. Now, this is important not for our course necessarily, but it's an important moment in the history of Judaism. Because all these empires coming and going, right? This is the one and only time the Judeans actually rebelled against the empire, and did so successfully. It also is from this period on, right, from the middle of the 2nd century BCE and on, right, this is a time of great diversity, richness in ancient Judaism. All of a sudden we see lots of fun and exciting things going on. We have parties, we have sects. Make sure you understood that word correctly, right? I know you go to college for parties and sects, but that's different, right? These are parties and sects is what we have during this period, from the 2nd century BCE down to destruction of the temple. We have Pharisees and Sadducees and Essenes and the people of Qumran and the Dead Sea Scrolls and our friends, the earliest Christians. We got plenty of parties and sects. Never before seen in the history of Judaism. We have the emergence of synagogues all of a sudden following this period in the 2nd century BC. We have the emergence of a whole new scribal class. In other words, things are happening. This is bubbling. It's effervescent. Things are happening in this period from the middle of the 2nd century BC. And the emergence of the earliest Christian movements are part and parcel of this, what shall we call it, unrest in society, this social upheavals, religious questing, whatever you want, however you want to characterize it. Well, it's part and parcel of that. And this goes straight from middle of the 2nd century BCE. First time we hear about Pharisees, Sadducees, and Essenes. If you don't know who they are, that's fine. But take my course next term. We'll have a course on ancient Jewish history. And we'll discuss Pharisees, Sadducees, and Essenes till they come out of your ears. Okay. We'll try to figure out what they are. Anyway, well, these are different groups, parties, sects, clans, or I don't know what to call them exactly. Right, are growing up in society. Okay, well, yeah. I'm trying to get you excited, but I'm not succeeding. Okay, so the Hasmoneans are on the throne, reigned for a year, and the Hasmoneans are a very brief blip, short blip on the graph, right? The brief period of Judean autonomy, not controlled by the large empires, but they carve out a little space for themselves, right? Until the next big empire comes around and just crushes Judea. And that, of course, is the Romans. Okay, the Romans. So here the Romans arrive in the Near East in the 1st century BCE, and they get to Judea in 63 BCE. 63 BC, the Romans take over Judea, and whatever sort of independence the Hasmoneans had been able to establish is gone. And Judea ultimately becomes just a province or a district of the under the Romans.
What are the names for the people of Israel, the Jews? The territory, is it Judea? Is it Palestine? Is it Israel?
Very good question. Okay, I haven't written a book on that, so I can speak knowledgeably on the subject. Let's see. I think 2 hours or so should be just about cover it.
On one foot.
On one foot. Right. So, in brief, right. The district, which of particular concern to us, the district around Jerusalem, is known as Judea, right? The land of the ancient tribe of Judah. The district is Judean. The people are Judeans. Jerusalem is the capital of Judea. Now, the word Judea can also be used more broadly to mean a larger piece of real estate. Here, I need a map, which I'm not going to bother to dig up right now. A bit larger piece of real estate from Galilee in the north down to Idumea or the Negev, the desert regions in the south. That whole thing can be called Judea, loosely speaking, just as in the old days we used to use the word Russia to mean lots of things well beyond the actual Russian Republic. What we sloppily would call the whole thing Russia. You know, of course, it's not true. Or just as Americans still call the whole thing England. Which of course is not true. England is just England, not to be confused with Scotland or Wales or Northern Ireland. Right. So sometimes you could loosely, inaccurately, use the name of the most important central district to refer to the whole thing. So similarly, Judea can sometimes be used, even in official language, to refer to the whole province, the whole district. Right. Even technically, Judea is just the area around Jerusalem. Okay, so I use the term Judeans to mean the citizens of Judea, people living in Judea, the area around Jerusalem, and by extension, in the entire country. Right? What makes them Jews, of course, which is a religious term, is that they all worship the God whose temple is in Jerusalem. They may argue with each other about how to worship this God. They may argue with each other about what exactly this God demands from us. They argue with each other about what is and what is not desirable, permissible, obligatory under the dictates of this God, but they're worshiping that God.
So did Moses lead Jews out of Egypt?
I already solved that one. Did Moses lead Jews out of Egypt? Of course not. Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt. The language of Jews is not found in the Hebrew Scriptures. Footnote, except in some late books where I think it means Judeans. Back to where we are. The language of Jews is never found in the Torah. It's not biblical language. So when I refer to the people of the Bible, I refer to them as Israel or Israelites. The period under the exile, living under empires, Persia, Babylon, Persia, Greek, Rome, these are Judeans. And ultimately we can call them Jews. Now the name Palestine, I'll come back to in 1 second. Thank you, Hillary. And thank you, Yoni. Okay, is that clear? Anybody unclear on that? This is nomenclature is a fun thing to worry about. Good. Okay, so where was I? Yes. Oh, so another person we need to talk about for 1 second is before the Romans took Judea as they made it an outright province, for a time they let the Judeans have their own king, let the Judeans rule themselves, right? And the name of the most famous of these Judean kings is Herod. Herod the Great, who reigned from 37 to 4 BCE. His name will come up in our reading from time to time. Herod the Great was a problematic figure. The analogy I like to use is something like Joseph Stalin, right? On the one hand, accomplished a great deal. On the other hand, at a very great price. Whether the price is worth what you got, well, that's something you can argue about. So Herod the Great is something like that, a problematic figure, a genius in some respects, and a paranoid maniac, persecutorial maniac on the other hand. The two seem to go together. Well, that's Herod the Great, and we will talk about him briefly. After his death in 4 BCE, the kingdom gradually splinters into pieces, and the Romans just, in a few decades, just take over the whole thing as a province with a Roman governor. Okay, the most famous of these Roman governors, I don't think is on your list, is Pontius Pilate, who executes one Jesus of Nazareth for unspecified crimes. That's the most famous Roman governor. Let me talk for a second about BCE and CE, make sure we understand that. So as you figured out, BCE we're counting down, or BC or BCE, whichever you like, we're counting down, and CE or AD, same thing, right? We're counting up. So we are right now in the year 2011 CE, or 2011 AD, if you prefer, and we roll that back, right, just to show you understand how it works. So it goes from 2 BCE, 1 BCE, 1 CE, 2 CE. Okay, everybody got that? So there's no year 0. Right? So, trick question. So how many years elapsed from January 1st, 2 BCE to January 1st, 2 CE? How many years elapsed, class? Alright, I'll repeat the question. How many years elapsed from January 1st, 2 BCE to January 1st, 2 CE, or 2 AD? How many years elapsed?
3.
3. Good. Right.
Harvard.
I thought that, but I didn't say it. Yeah, exactly. Right. There is no 0. Right. So in mathematics, -2 to +2 is 4 because you've got 0. Right here, you're losing a year because there is no 0. Okay, that's the point I'm trying to get you to understand. Okay, what does this dating system mean? This, of course, was invented much later, long after these events, right, by a medieval chronographer, right, who was trying to arrange all the various chronologies of the ancient world. And for this medieval chronographer, the most important event, right? Why do we have a turn of the eras altogether? This most important event, of course, is the birth of Jesus, right? So according to his calculation, Jesus was born December 25th, 1 BC, or 1 BCE, Then 8 days later, what happens to little Jewish boys 8 days after they are born? Circumcised. All right, they get clipped, right? We'll talk about that very, very soon. Right? So Jesus is circumcised. And what is the festival of circumcision? January 1st. 1 AD. January 1st, 1 CE. Okay, that's the system. Now those of you who are attentive students of the Bible will know that Herod the Great was on the throne when, in order to massacre all the innocents, right? Because he had received the prophecy about the new king for the house of David, so he was busy killing all the little baby boys so that they shouldn't become king. He did not realize Jesus' kingdom is a different kind of kingdom. So that's the story in the Gospel of Matthew. But you'll notice very quickly something is wrong. If Herod the Great dies in 4 BCE, how is that possible that he's massacring the innocents who aren't born until 4 years later? Good point. It shows you the chronology here is a little wobbly, right? Get everything lined up just so was very difficult, and this very learned chronographer in the Middle Ages didn't quite get everything right. Okay? But that's not our problem either, although it's a fascinating problem. Okay? So we have the Romans. Right? So the Romans have now arrived in Judea. Now we're counting up again. We're in the 1st century CE, or 1st century AD. Footnote on that, right? I use CE as a small token act of Jewish resistance against Christian hegemonic discourse. Right? AD, of course, means year of the Lord, Anno Domini. Jesus is not my Lord and Savior. So, is this futile? Yes. Is this kind of stupid? Yes. But nonetheless, allow me this symbolic act of cultural resistance, so I don't say AD, I say CE. For the common era. If you want to use the language of AD, fine. I have no objection, right? You will not be marked down if you write the language of AD or right before Christ, Anno Domini. That's perfectly fine, right? Just allow me, humor me on this one, right? This is just me. Okay, you'll decide if this is something you want to adopt as your cause, or just go with the flow and not care. Yes, Anna.
On the notes, it says that BCE is before the Christian era and CE is Christian era. You just said that it's common era.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing.
Which one is it?
Whatever we want it to be. As long as I'm not saying year of the Lord, that's all that matters. Right. And as long as I'm not saying, before Christ. Before the Christian era is a statement of fact. This is a Christian era. We can live before the Christian era or after, or in the Christian era. That's just a statement, a neutral statement of fact. It does not imply endorsement. I said, this is fine. Okay. Or someone's going to say either, right, you got it. Okay, just humor me on this one. And if you don't want to humor me, that's okay. Then you write AD in large capital bold-faced letters in your essay. You will not be marked down for it. Okay, where was I? Yes, 1st century C. So, 1st century C, this of course is yet another momentous century, in a series of very momentous centuries with lots of exciting things going on. Right? So, of course, here marked by 2 really, really dramatic events. Just to pick the second one first, in the 70 CE is the destruction of the temple. Okay, this is another date you need to impress in your memory, right? This is another important one. 70 CE, the Romans destroy the temple in Jerusalem. Why did the Romans destroy the temple in Jerusalem? Because the Jews had rebelled, or the Judeans had rebelled. Why did the Judeans rebel, you ask? Very good question. A very long and messy question, which I will not discuss here. I will discuss that in my course on ancient Jewish history next term, where we'll be reading the famous book, The Jewish War, by Josephus, who writes a whole book to try to explain to you what happened. Right? Why the Judeans took it into their crazy heads to rebel against the Romans, and when any idiot could tell them they're going to lose. I mean, let's just look at how many tanks you have and how many tanks the Romans have. You're going to lose. But the Judeans rebelled anyway. Okay, culminating with the destruction of the temple in the year 70. And the Masada, the famous redoubt, held out for a few more years. And if you go to Israel, you'll go take the cable car and see Masada. It's a beautiful thing. So, 73, 74, the war is over. Okay? It's an important event because it marks the end of the temple. We'll talk about the Temple of Jerusalem somewhat. The temple is no longer. I know there's Temple Isaiah down the road, or a Temple Beth Shalom, or a few miles away. Right. So the Jewish synagogues, starting in the 19th century, start to call themselves temple again. But this ain't the same thing, right? The Temple of Jerusalem was something sui generis, right? It is gone, is not yet returned. Pious Jews, some of them at least, yearned for the restoration of the Temple of Jerusalem, but it has not yet happened. And some pious Christians also, on behalf of the Jews, want the Jews to get their temple back because they know when the Jews get the temple back, that's when Christ will return. Okay, but none of this has happened. Anyway, but the precondition of all this, of course, is that the temple was destroyed, right, by the Romans. Yes, sir. Do you have a question?
So do those Jews believe that like the priesthood is going to be like reinstated? Like,
Absolutely. We Cohens, we're going to run the show again, right? Here I am reduced to being a college teacher to make a living, right? When the temple gets rebuilt, we Cohens will run the show. Yeah. Right. Okay. So that's a very momentous event with long-term repercussions in the history of Judaism, right? And I'll come back to that point in just a moment. The other major event, of course, in these decades, the middle of the first century CE, is the emergence of the beginnings of what will turn out to become Christianity. Right? So we have the comings and goings of one Jesus of Nazareth. The exact chronology is very unclear. But apparently sometime in the 30s CE, we have in the two of the Gospels, we have infancy Gospels in Matthew and Luke about the young Jesus. Mark and John have nothing about the young Jesus, absolutely nothing at all. He simply emerges, poof, as the fully grown embodied Word of God in John, or simply as a grown-up in Mark. Even Matthew and Luke, which have infancy Gospels, have nothing about his teenage years, his formative years, they just skip. So Jesus emerges as a grown-up. Right, on our narrative, where so his youth and formative period is hidden from us. All of a sudden he's doing something. Right? And of course, the most prominent thing that he does, of course, is to get killed or to get executed. We'll discuss some of this down the road a piece. So these events presumably happened in the 30s CE. 30s CE. Right? So even though Jesus dies, is executed. Right? His followers believe something extraordinary about this man, even after his death. Right? That, of course, launches what will become, ultimately, Christianity. Right? Then the next major figure would be Paul. So Jesus is active in the 30s CE. Paul is active in the 50s CE. So I give you here the names of the 7 genuine letters of Paul. Right? Out of the 13 letters attributed to Paul in the New Testament, 7 are widely conceded by all hands. These are genuine letters of Paul. The other 6 we can talk about. But these for sure are 7. So here are those 7 genuine letters of Paul. Okay? I think we're ready to move the screen. Okay? Questions? Okay, so briefly what happens after 70. So after 70 CE, we have the emergence of beginnings of Christian literature. Again, we can't use the word Christian yet, or we can just begin to use the word Christian yet. But Christian does not necessarily mean yet non-Jew. After all, Pharisees, Sadducees, and Essenes are also named groups, but these are completely Jewish groups within Jewish society. So at some point, Christians seem to begin their life as Jewish groups, but ultimately they will turn into something else. That's C. Mr. Scott Enslin, and we'll discuss that very shortly. Okay, so Christians are gradually emerging with the emergence of Christian literature, which we might call. And of course, we have the Gospels. We have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. According to our chronology, Mark is the earliest Gospel, around the year 70 CE. There's argument whether Mark is just before or just after the destruction of the temple. Depends on how you understand the apocalypse in Mark 13. So Mark is something around the time of the destruction of the temple. Matthew and Luke, we think, are in the 80s CE. And then the Gospel of John around the year 100 CE. Right, this is not when these books get put into a Christian Bible. There ain't no such thing yet. This is when we think the Gospels are written. You have to wait another whole century to go by before we start to have the emergence of a new Christian Bible, a new Christian book, a new Testament. You have to wait around a century still before these books get singled out and put into this new category. Okay. All right, let me talk. So here I give you some. Then I give you in the 2nd century. I've given you some names and dates. I'm just going to skip over quickly, just to see where you are. Circa 130, I wrote down the letter of Barnabas. Yes, I wrote that there on your. Yes. Circa 120, Ignatius of Antioch. Who's Ignatius of Antioch? Let's not worry about him right now. The important thing is here we find attested the noun Christianity. So that's an important moment in Christian self-definition, the emergence of a Christian sense of self. Christianity emerges for the first time. Circa 130 we have Barnabas. Who is Barnabas? Barnabas was a traveling companion of Paul. But somebody else, we don't know who, wrote an epistle, a sermon, or something, right, attributed to Barnabas. So we call it the Epistle of Barnabas, but it's, anyway, why am I mentioning it? Because we're going to read some of it. Barnabas is that epistle, that rhetoric, that speech of Barnabas is all about Judaism and Christianity, if I can use that language. Right? Barnabas is already worried about this question of the Jews claim to observe the Bible, and we claim to observe the Bible. Well, who's doing it correctly? That appears there in miniature as one of the main themes of this epistle, which is why we're going to look at a couple of pieces. Most famously, his allegory of Torah law. We Christians don't have to observe the laws because we understand what they, quote, really mean. We understand their inner meaning, their spirit. The Jews observe the letter. We observe the spirit. They observe the externals. We observe the internals. That language, which I used last week, that comes straight out of Barnabas. And we'll read some of that stuff. Okay, we have the revolt of Bar Kokhba, the last gasp of Jewish militancy in antiquity, 132 to 135. This will be mentioned a couple of times in your reading, where the Judeans are not content to have lost against the Romans once, with a bloody nose in the year 70 CE. They thought it would be a good idea to do it again. It was so much fun, we'll repeat it. So 132 to 135, the Jews at this point, you might say, rebel against the Romans, with very predictable results. They lose. And they lose badly. This is the end. There are no more great revolts against anybody by the Jews for a very long time. One could argue not perhaps until the 20th century, when Jews finally rebel against empires, in this case the British Empire. Okay, but that's a slightly different discussion. So back to where we are. So 132-135 is the great defeat of Bar Kokhba or Bar Kospa by the Romans. This is significant because the Romans, to punish the Judeans, right, undertake to de-Judaize Judea. So at this point, Judea's new official name is Palestina. So for the first time, the name Palestina refers not just to the coastal region, close to where the modern Gaza Strip is, which is more or less what Palestina was originally, namely the coastal zone. Palestina means land of the Philistines. So the Romans now decided that land of the Philistines is the name for the whole country, not just the coastal region. Right? Just as it is still used today by people who want to de-Judaize, right, the land, they would call it Palestine. Right? This goes back to the Romans. So we have then the destruction, we have then a de-Judaization by the Romans, especially the area district of Judea around Jerusalem. The result is Judeans flee Judea for other regions in the country. The rabbis, whom we'll talk about in 1 second, flee to Galilee and also off to the coast. And Christians also flee, right? According to the story in the church historian, there are no more ethnic Jews in the Jerusalem church after Bar Kokhba. So all the ethnic Jews have fled, leaving behind only Gentile Christians in the church of Jerusalem, which is, again, is a formative moment in the emergence of a non-Jewish Christianity, which we'll be talking about. Okay, that was Palestine. Okay, I answered that question earlier. Other questions? on that score. Yes, sir.
Just explain the origin of the word Palestine.
Yes, Palestine is the Greek form from the name Philistines. So Judea is the land of Judeans. Palestina is the land of the Palestinians, aka Philistines. Who are the Philistines? The Philistines are one of the sea peoples who invaded Canaan, if I can use that name now, long ago, probably sometime in the second millennium BCE. Their language was not a Semitic language. They did not practice circumcision, so they were definitely standouts, right? And they were a constant thorn in the side of the Israelites. So says the narrative in the Book of Kings. So King David was conquering everybody right and left, but he couldn't ever quite fully master the Philistines. Okay, that's Philistines. So originally was the area, again, close to where the Gaza Strip is today. That's the heart of ancient Philistia, Palestina. Okay, and now that name is now transferred to mean the whole country. Yes, sir.
I think you might have already talked about this a little bit, but I got a little confused. What is the difference between the Jews and the Israelites?
Okay, all right. I guess I was trying to avoid giving a long essay on that subject, but I guess I'll have to. So I'm going to distinguish three terms, but it's a fair question. So if you're confused, I'm sure someone else is too. So I'll need to deal with it. Let's distinguish three things. We have Israelites, we have Judeans, and we have Jews. Okay, so Israelites, the people of Israel, the land of Israel. These are biblical terms in biblical language. Bible, from the Hebrew Bible, right? I'm raising it now dramatically, right? The Hebrew Bible, right? Right? It talks about the children of Israel. Israel being another name for the patriarch Jacob, who had 12 sturdy sons, each of whom was the progenitor of tribes. So 12 tribes, 12 sons of Israel, children of Israel, Israel. Okay, it's not the only name. And there are all kinds of nuances here which we don't have time to deal with. But Israel is a biblical name. I use it to refer to the people of the Bible are Israelites. Right? They are the people of Israel, and in some very few passages, the land of Israel, which is actually a very rare biblical locution. Okay, that's Israel. Right, Judeans, I'm using to distinguish that when we get to the post-biblical period. The name Israel turns out to be some kind of theological concept. Right, it's not actually used as a term of identification. You don't walk around with an Israelite ID card, with an Israelite on your ID card. They didn't use that language. What language did they use? They would be Judeans. Right, people of Judea or people whose ancestors came from Judea. You can live somewhere else like Italy or Egypt and still be Judean because your grandpa came from Judea. So you would call yourself a Judean. Now, at some point, we moderns would want to make a distinction between Judean as an ethnic political term and Judean as a religious cultural term. So we moderns in English distinguish between Judean as people from this district from people who worship a God whose temple is in Jerusalem. In the latter sense, we call them Jews.
Only after 586.
Only after 586, or I would argue even not before 150 BCE, is what I've argued in my book. So the same word in Greek means both Judean and Jew, and depends on what nuance we moderns attribute it. We want to translate it as Judean, we want to translate it as Jew. By the time you get to the destruction of the temple after 70, I would say for sure we're talking about Jews. We have long since separated ourselves from Israel, except as a theological concept. I'm sorry that's a little confusing. It's not crucial for our purposes, so if you didn't get it all, I'm sorry. Maybe we can discuss it in section. Or I can assign you my book if you want to read it. Chapters 3 and 4 of my Beginnings of Jewishness give a very full discussion of this subject. Probably fuller than you want. Okay, but fair enough. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions, or should I try again to get at that, or is this okay for now? Okay, so after Bar Kokhba 132, 135, right, so we have a de-Judaization. We have ethnic Jews are kicked out of Jerusalem. They're kicked out of Judea. The Romans changed the name of the country. And this clearly marks wherever leftovers we had from before 70 of some kind of Jewish autonomy or something. This is now pretty much gone. So, after this period, we have the emergence of, by this time, we have something we can meaningfully talk about is Christianity over here and Judaism over here. Right? At what moment can we meaningfully talk about two separate, parallel, competing social structures, institutions, ideologies, programs? Well, that's a much debated question. That's what we mean by the parting of the ways. We understand that in the time of Jesus and Paul, all the earliest Christians were ethnic Jews, and Christianity was a kind of Judaism. That's obvious for all. And the Gospels don't make any try to hide this fact. Well, they try to hide it a little bit. But okay, they don't really hide the fact. Well, they don't hide it very well. Right. So, Jews, Jesus, all the 12 apostles, the disciples, the crowds whom he attracts, these are all Judeans, or if you want, Jews. But by the 2nd century CE sometime, right, these people who we might now call Christians, who are now believers in, upholders of Christianity, we now have words for them, right, they are no longer part of Judean society or Jewish society. They, in fact, are often as not antipathetic. What's the word? Antithetical to it, or have an antipathy towards it. In other words, they don't like it. Or they're busy defining their Christian selves as one way of defining ourselves is we are not Jews. And what we're doing is not Judaism. Even though we share the same scriptures with the Jews. And even though everybody knows we come from the same place. And once upon a time we were in the same neighborhood. But that was then, and this is now. So by the 2nd century CE, or sometime in the middle, you can see an emergence of a distinctively Christian literature, Christian self-identity, Christian theology, Christian rituals, modes of worship, and so on. Everybody understands this go back somehow, somewhere to the 1st century CE, but how exactly we tease out this very mysterious development from the one to the other, well, that is a giant historical question, in which great minds have written much, and that is what I mean by the parting of the ways. So here I've given you a bunch of Christian authors, very important figures. Justin Martyr, somebody we'll be reading a lot from, for reasons I'll explain on Thursday, and also Marcion. We've already met Marcion. Remember Marcion? Right, Marcion is the one who posits a clear distinction between the Jewish God and the Christian God. Right? The Jewish God is an inferior God. The Christian God is the real God. The Jewish God is a bad God. Right, that's Marcion. Right? Against whom Justin will be arguing, as we will see. I want to get to the last line. Circa 200 CE. So I gave you a bunch of Christian names there. Circa 200 CE, Rabbi Judah the Patriarch edits the Mishnah, the first rabbinic book. This is also really big. Well, within the history of Judaism, it's really big. Perhaps some of you never heard of the Mishnah before. I understand that. Depends on where you're coming from. Where I come from, this is really big. Right. So circa 200 CE, Rabbi Judah the Patriarch, whose name is not important for our purposes, right, edits the Mishnah. The Mishnah represents the culmination of a new kind of Judaism. It's a new kind of writing, a new kind of literature. It is what we might call a scholastic Judaism, right? A Judaism of schools. It is based on minute and particular legal analysis of the laws of the Torah. The Mishnah represents what we might call, take 3. The Mishnah will become the portable homeland, which is a wonderful phrase. A portable homeland of the Judeans, of the Jews. Right? As they set about now to living in diaspora or exile for the next 2,000 years, and Jews living in America, for example, are still in diaspora, right? However, I have my homeland because I have my Mishnah. I can raise this again because I have the Mishnah here. Right? I have my Mishnah. Wherever I go, I can take my text with me. Wherever I have my text, I have my Judaism. And the Mishnah becomes the heart and soul, the cornerstone of an extraordinary explosion, efflorescence, of a literature that we call rabbinic literature. right, which involves meticulous reading of Scripture and meticulous interpretation of Scripture and extraordinary ways of elaborating the meanings of Scripture. So, last big point. Modern scholars don't like to talk about Christianity emerging from Judaism, because their argument is, many modern scholars have said this, is that after 70 CE, we have a new kind of Judaism emerging from Judaism, which is to say, this new rabbinic scholastic Judaism. So actually what you have is not Christianity separating from Judaism. What you have is a new kind of Judaism emerging over here, and a new kind of Judaism emerging over here. One of these turns out to be Christianity. One of these turns out to be the Judaism of the Mishnah and rabbinic piety and rabbinic Judaism. But these are parallel developments beginning from the same place. I know parallel lines don't intersect, I know that. Right? These are both developments that come from the same place, i.e. that world, that welter of schools, parties, sects that had been ancient Judaism up to the year 70, right? That world comes to an end, the destruction of the temple, unleashing various creative processes that will give us Christianity over here and rabbinic Judaism over there. That is the new politically correct way to look at the emergence of Judaism and Christianity, not Christianity emerging from Judaism, but Judaism emerging from Judaism. Okay, who understood what I just said? Is that clear? In other words, the argument would be that the Judaism of the 2nd century CE, which becomes the cornerstone of all Judaisms that will later exist in the world, including today, I don't care whether you're Orthodox, Conservative, Reform, Reconstructionist, New Age, Spiritualist, Neo-Hasidic, gay, lesbian, whatever. It doesn't matter. The Judaism that you observe or don't observe, the Judaism that you love or that you hate, doesn't matter. That Judaism is going to be the descendant of this Judaism of the 2nd century CE, of the Mishnah and the Talmud. Not the Judaism of the Temple. So if you accept that, then Judaism itself is itself a new creation in response to the destruction of the temple, just as Christianity is a new creation in response to the destruction of the temple. Karaite Judaism. Well, Karaites rebel. I can't deal with everybody. How much can I do in one class? Karaites are rebellion against rabbinic Judaism. Okay, everybody, time is up. I didn't quite get to Scott Enslin. So on Thursday, I'll have to talk extra